My wife looked me in the eye and said, "Your income belongs to us, but mine is mine alone." So I quietly opened a separate account, bought the motorcycle of my dreams, and her reaction changed everything. After 8 years of marriage, I thought I had a good sense of what my wife was like. But I was wrong. It all kicked off about 3 months ago when I got promoted to senior marketing director at work. My pay nearly doubled, and I was excited to share the news, thinking we could finally start planning for that kitchen renovation she wanted, or maybe even look for a bigger house. But her reaction took me by surprise. At dinner, she smiled when I told her, but her vibe felt a bit off. She congratulated me but quickly switched gears to our finances. Since she was doing well managing her own money, she wanted to keep it that way. Her design income was hers to do as she pleased, but she insisted my salary still needed to go into our joint account like it always had. I questioned why we couldn't have a setup that allowed both of us some personal funds. She got defensive, saying her income was unpredictable, while my steady paycheck should cover our shared expenses and goals. The conversation heated up, and she accused me of being selfish for questioning her financial independence. I pointed out the double standard, but she dismissed it, claiming I was trying to control her money, which wasn't my aim at all. That night, as I lay in bed, her words echoed in my head. "My income is mine. Your income is ours." The next morning, I told her I understood her point and agreed to her terms. She seemed relieved and kissed me goodbye as she headed off to her studio. Little did she know, I had already made a decision that would change everything. I opened a separate checking account that very day. For 5 years, all my earnings had gone into our joint account. She handled most of the bills and spending, and I rarely questioned it because I trusted her. To be honest, I didn't pay much attention to money as long as everything was taken care of. But now, with my new salary, I figured I'd stick to her rules. I calculated our necessary expenses: mortgage, utilities, groceries, insurance, car payments, and a little extra for miscellaneous spending. I deposited that amount into our joint account every month. Everything beyond that, which was now a good chunk of change thanks to my promotion, went into my separate account. In the first month, she didn't notice anything different. All the bills were paid, groceries were stocked, and life kept rolling along. By the second month, she remarked how surprising it was that I hadn't suggested any big purchases or brought up the kitchen renovation. I told her I was still figuring out our priorities and wanted to be wise with the extra cash. She seemed fine with that. Then, by the third month, I had saved enough to get something I'd really wanted: a motorcycle. Not just any motorcycle, but this gorgeous 1970 Triumph Bonaventure that I had been eyeing at a vintage shop for over a year. The owner had restored it beautifully, and I figured it was finally time to treat myself. I also bought all the gear: a leather jacket, helmet, boots, and gloves. It all added up to about $15,000. I arranged for it to be delivered on a Saturday morning while she was at her yoga class. When she came back home and spotted the motorcycle in the driveway, her expression went from confusion to anger pretty quickly. She grilled me about where it came from and how much it cost. I calmly explained that I bought it with my money from my separate account. Her tone turned sharp as she asked what separate account I was talking about. I reminded her that I was just following the rules she had set, keeping my extra money separate while still contributing fairly to our shared household expenses. She stared at me, clearly caught off guard, and asked if I was serious. I assured her that I was. I reminded her of our earlier conversation and her clear stance about our incomes. I explained that I was just sticking to her suggestion to treat my income as mine while still fulfilling our shared obligations. The argument that followed was intense. She accused me of being petty and immature. To her, buying a motorcycle without a discussion first was irresponsible, and she said I was trying to make a point. I stayed calm and asked how this was any different from her design income being separate. I pointed out that I was covering my share of everything we had agreed upon, just like she did with her finances. She insisted it wasn't the same because her business income was unpredictable. But I reminded her that she had been profitable for the past couple of years. Plus, I noted how she'd bought a new laptop, camera gear, and taken a weekend trip with her sister last month without running any of that by me. She claimed those were business necessities. I challenged her to explain how a motorcycle was different from her personal expenses. The conversation went around in circles for an hour. She tried justifying her spending while labeling mine as reckless, but struggled to find a logical distinction that didn't hinge on the double standard she had set up. That evening, she switched tactics and became more affectionate. She suggested that we both have personal spending money, but agreed that bigger purchases should still be joint decisions. I thought that sounded fair and asked if she'd be willing to return her camera gear to discuss it first, considering it happened after we set the current rules. This made her frustrated again, accusing me of being hard to negotiate with. Over the next week, she bounced between trying to make me feel guilty about my decision and negotiating new terms. She talked about motorcycle dangers and maintenance costs. I addressed each point practically. I had already added it to our insurance with my own funds, found a reliable mechanic for maintenance, and even completed a safety course before making the purchase. I mentioned that I sometimes rode it to work and genuinely enjoyed it. This seemed to resonate with her differently. She finally asked if I ever felt restricted from getting what I wanted in the past. I told her I never felt restricted, but I always kept in mind how personal spending would affect our joint goals. I had assumed she would do the same, so her separate income policy surprised me. After that conversation, she remained quiet for a few days. Eventually, she brought up the kitchen renovation again, saying she'd gotten quotes from contractors and wanted to plan when to start. I thought it was a great idea and suggested she use some of her separate savings for it, just like I did with the motorcycle. She immediately countered, saying home improvements were different because they benefited us both. I agreed, but proposed we split the costs equally from our personal funds since we would both benefit. She argued that wasn't fair because I was now earning more. I reminded her that she had insisted her income was hers to manage, no matter how much it was. I pointed out that I was just applying the same logic she laid out. She accused me of being deliberately obtuse and misinterpreting her original intent. I asked her to clarify since her words had been pretty clear, but she couldn't provide a coherent explanation that didn't contradict her earlier stance. The standoff dragged on for another 2 weeks. She tried various tactics to pull me back into our previous financial setup, but I stood my ground, saying I was just following the framework she had created. A breakthrough happened when her sister came over for the weekend. I wasn't supposed to overhear their chat in the kitchen, but our house isn't all that big. Her sister asked about the motorcycle and why my wife seemed upset. My wife shared the whole story, painting me as stubborn and unreasonable for making a big purchase without discussing it first. Her sister asked if my wife had consulted me before buying her new camera and laptop. My wife insisted that was different since it was her money. Her sister pointed out that the motorcycle was mine by the same logic. My wife went on about household priorities and joint responsibilities, but her sister pressed on, asking why those applied only to my income and not hers. My wife got defensive, saying her sister didn't understand the whole situation. Then her sister said it sounded like my wife wanted independence with her money but control over mine. That conversation seemed to plant a seed because my wife was unusually quiet for the rest of the weekend. The following Monday evening, she came to me with a new attitude, admitting she hadn't fully considered the implications of her original position. She said she'd been so focused on her financial independence that she hadn't thought about how it impacted our partnership. I appreciated her honesty and told her I understood her desire for autonomy. I clarified that I hadn't bought the motorcycle to spite her but because I realized I hadn't had the chance to make personal financial decisions in our marriage. She asked if I regretted the purchase, and I genuinely told her I didn't. I had wanted it for years, could afford it without affecting our shared obligations, and loved having something that was completely mine. She nodded and fell silent for a moment. To my surprise, she asked if she could take a ride on it sometime. In the following month, we worked out a new financial agreement that felt fair for both of us. We listed our household expenses and agreed to contribute based on our incomes. Everything beyond that became personal money for each of us to manage independently. The major difference from her original plan was that this arrangement was truly equal. We both enjoyed financial freedom while still keeping our shared responsibilities. She used some of her personal savings to upgrade her studio equipment and to enroll in a photography workshop she was interested in. I splurged on vintage motorcycle parts and started learning how to handle my own maintenance. As for the kitchen renovation, we decided to save up together, using portions of each of our personal funds each month. It might take longer than pooling all our cash, but it felt better to contribute equally to something we both wanted. My motorcycle went from being a source of conflict to a symbol of our new financial approach. She never did take that ride with me. However, she stopped calling it dangerous or impractical. More importantly, we both felt we had our financial independence while still working together toward our shared goals. This experience taught me an important lesson about sticking to my principles while remaining open to genuine compromise. Her initial proposal wasn't fundamentally wrong. She had valid reasons for wanting financial independence. But applying a double standard would have only led to resentment and imbalance in our relationship. By pushing her proposal to its logical extremes and applying it equally, we confronted whether we really wanted separate financial lives or a truly shared partnership. In the end, we discovered a middle ground that worked for us both. The motorcycle still sits in our driveway, and every time I see it, I'm reminded that sometimes the best way to work through a conflict isn't by arguing against the other person's view, but by fully following it until its flaws become clear. 6 months later, our marriage feels more balanced than it has in a long time. We're contributing to shared goals while still maintaining our individual identities and interests. And yes, I still love riding that motorcycle. If you're interested in hearing more stories like this, a gentle tap on that subscribe button would really mean a lot to us. Please consider subscribing.